At the moment, the internet is having a fascinating little spat over whether or not the clown chick from the Amazing Digital Circus was over-sexualized, or not, in their Fortnite collaboration. Now personally, I just don't see it. But to each its own, I do suppose. The discourse itself, however, is quite the interesting peek into what happens when the right invades and starts taking over the left's spaces. Which may sound like a bit of a reach considering we're discussing literal clown hips here, but make no mistake, this is very much so what is happening. And in a few more years, I predict, quite boldly now, that Glitch Productions will be the first entity to be successfully subverted by the anti-progressives. And even more boldly, I assert that they'll be engaged in this race with Activision Blizzard. But let me zoom on out for a moment to provide some context to these seemingly wild predictions. Once upon a time, not so very long ago, there was a big old drama about a short animated video named Planetronika. I did a video covering it at the time, but in short, the video got a ton of backlash, Planetronika that is, for its character Butterfly. Because, well, she wasn't a 300-pound land whale that could curdle milk just by looking at it. In fact, Butterfly was hot. Or in other words, the exact opposite of the current standard of beauty amongst the severely deranged. Roughly simultaneous with this, however, there was a related but also a very different bit of drama. This is Kit. She's the protagonist character of Glitch Productions' new series, Gameoverse. And she too got a lot of pushback for being too pretty. In fact, the entire episode was hammered with the usual accusations of being sexualized, a Goonerbait porn slop. And certainly, Kit attracted her fair share of fan art of an adventurous nature, just like Butterfly did. At first glance then, these dramas might appear rather similar. However, they are not. The Gameoverse controversy is very different due to what came next. Namely, the community response to it. Things like, reading through the comments, since when the fuck did Gameoverse get a right-wing audience? Huh? What? Or, it is a shame that Gameoverse has been pseudo-co-opted by reactionaries. I'm sure they'll forget about it in a few weeks or so, but still. Allow me to provide some context here yet again. Glitch Productions is both a very progressive, and by the standards of heavy quotation marks, indie YouTube animation channels, a very mainstream company. I mean, we are really stretching the indie label well beyond the point of anal fissuring here. They've got a goddamn Fortnite skin, for Pete's sake. That's the reason for this entire video. We really could use a discussion on the topic of when an indie ceases to be an indie, as was not technically required, of course, as indie simply means independent, therefore independent from larger publishers. The term does imply a certain level of, well, low-scale / amateur level endeavor, you know, a plucky indie, rather than a multi-million-dollar studio with a theatrical release. Anywho, Glitch also has a ton of industry professional in its ranks, some of whom have access to grind with their previous employers for not being quite progressive enough. And indeed, Glitch's previous title, Knights of Guinevere, is just that, a very prog-friendly series with all the unattractive females of varying shapes and sizes that the modern audience desires. It was the very definition of a safe space. Up until that damn cat came by, that is, as Gameoverse is a much, much more traditional style series, both in terms of style, design, and in characters, than damn near anything Glitch has ever done before. And to further rub the salt nice and deep into the wound created by Kit's sexualization, Gameoverse has already rocketed past the prog-friendly entertainment of Guinevere to become Glitch Productions' third most popular series. We can extrapolate some interesting little factoids from this, as it means that even when the entertainment is tailor-made to their sensibilities, from a creator with both deep industry ties and an established progressive brand, the traditionally attractive character in the traditionally appealing story style still does way better than their own focused entertainment. That must sting. And sting it did indeed, as ever since the pilot's launch, the left-wing fanbase of Glitch Productions has been in full-on offense mode, attempting as hard as they can to gatekeep their thing from the evil chuds, doing things like fixing Kit's design by making her fat or male. Yeah. Fixing is an interesting term that we will return to a little bit later. Or alternatively, one of their favorite tactics, which is simply planting their flag on as many things as they can. A behavior I always found strangely reminiscent of animals pissing on things to mark territory. Anywho, why is this happening? Well, the tweets sums it up pretty well. Since when did Gameoverse get a right-wing audience? Or all of the comments and quotes are right-wingers. I must say, it is an interesting experience to be on this side of the glass for once. Normally, I am the one arguing for gatekeeping to keep the leftists out. Now, as I quite enjoyed Gameoverse, I'm the one trying to get in. Oh, not too hard, mind you, as the only show of theirs I do like is Gameoverse, and even then, it's got promise, but it's a bit overrated, perhaps. Still, this change of perspective has revealed some interesting things to me. See, we all know the pattern whenever the progressives infiltrate a fandom, right? First, they claim to be massive fans of the thing. They've always been massive fans of the thing. Then they start nitpicking the thing. They start to suggest ways to fix, as shown earlier, the thing. Invariably, these fixes are always to make the thing progressive, as the flaws are simply the parts of the thing that are not already progressive to begin with. Obviously, having things that are not progressive must mean the creators are simply just evil, vile, racist misogynists, the worst kind of people imaginable, and must be shouted at and threatened until they promise to do better. And even then the shouting and the threats will continue, but oh well. Looking back at it then, it's surprising how effective this tactic turned out to be, resulting in the creators usually bending the knee and painting their thing with all of the colors of the rainbow. Now, the reasons for that is, well, of a larger cultural origin, which we're not going to get in here, but the Kit drama shows all the usual signs of this. The people claim to love the thing, to have always loved the thing, but then criticize a part of the thing, in this case for being too sexy. Then they fix the thing, making it objectively worse, I think we can all agree, and they slather their colors all over it. The reaction is 1-to-1, and even then, this was a relatively tame drama compared to earlier instances. Remember yet again what I said about Glitch being a very progressive company? Well, according to their Glassdoor reviews, which is a site where supposedly former employees can leave reviews anonymously on companies they've worked for, Glitch Productions are sexist and racist. And you should certainly never consider working there if you're a woman. Well, there we have the final ingredient, don't we? But, okay, why does Glitch hate women then? Well, They apparently fired a voice actor shortly before this, and to be fair, in a pretty terrible way too, in that they never actually informed the voice actor that she was getting replaced. In addition to this, the company supposedly operated with downright terrible management and with massive overwork for the animators. A statement was released weeks later after the drama, when the backlash simply failed to die down, and largely calmed things down enough for everything to continue, after a ton of harassment towards new and old employees. And we can be pretty damn sure all of this came from the progressive fanbase and or old employees, as it's pretty rare for anyone else to scream racist over a management mishap. This is all, again, pretty interesting from an outsider perspective, along with various complaints about Glitch's audience being absolutely awful, in that even when you have a progressive thing made by and for progressives, the progs in it are still terrible people, eternally looking for the slightest thing to pop off about and assault the creators. The worst part of all of this is you can't even predict what will set them off. Right now, for example, the fandom seems to be in an internal war about the Fortnite collab model for Pomni, the clown girl. Some going absolutely feral for her. Performatively so, I mean, come on. And the other side is annoyed she has curves now. You are dancing on a minefield with every update. Every change risks upsetting your very delicate fanbase. And meanwhile, what about that right-wing invasion we heard about earlier? The freak-out about the right-wing fanbase. Well, that's another interesting thing. They appear to have swung by, watched the thing, made some fan art, commented on the thing, defended it, and then melted back into the general fandom as people who just simply like the thing. Not for what it could be, or in spite of its political flaws, or because of the politics, apparently, of its creators. They just came in, watched a cute little cartoon, enjoyed it, and that was it. I suppose this was already obvious, but any other audience, other than the progs that is, are, well, just normal. Capable even of enjoying a thing that is not technically, explicitly and expressly made for them, even as the progressives, well, they can't even enjoy the thing that was made specifically and expressively for them. Which is also why, incidentally, I suspect that Glitch is making these more recent changes, as we finally arrive at the torturous path back to the primary point here. Again, Kit is a far more traditionally attractive character. In fact, you can see the intent in her design to make her thus in a released little progress art piece of her, showing that as she developed, her boobs and hips got bigger over time. The character went from the more quirky style to the attractive style, from the more prog-friendly style to the now, as we can see, significantly less friendly style. And finally, we now get another character from their setting, a tiny clown midget that the internet haunts over for reasons that apparently goes well above my head. And Glitch elects to give her a little extra boom here and there. Now, admittedly, to be fair, one could argue that it was Fortnite who did this. Possibly, but I mean, this is a collab, so obviously the Glitch production people would have needed to sign off on this. And considering how testy their audience have been in the past, it seems extremely unlikely that they would have been somehow unaware of the potential backlash and consequences of making these changes, meaning they must have done so intentionally, right? And here's the thing too, for once, I agree with the Screechers, they technically did not have to do this to the character. They did not have to give her that little extra boom. I'm glad they did, but there were other options. Which leads me to the complete, mind you, speculation part of all of this, but look here. Viewing Glitch's history, I don't really think they are so much a woke company, necessarily, so much as they are a make the popular thing company, chasing what its fan base and the general populace appear to want/are accepted towards. And as the progressive culture has been the overwhelmingly dominant one now for a very long time, that appeared to be the target audience, the goal demographic, in the same way and for the same reason that the most large companies attempted to replace their fandoms with a new progressive one. They failed, of course, because they already had established fandoms that would turn against their creations. Meanwhile, Glitch didn't, so they were free to seek out the audience they desired, whilst also being able to provide a, admittedly, fairly high-quality product. And with that in mind then, with the recent series of microaggressions like Kit and making Pomni curvier, it seems as if the next shift is coming, mirroring a broader tilt in the culture at large. The progressive position is getting ever more unpopular, and so by natural contrast, the opposition viewpoint is gaining ground. Especially as we saw in an episode last week, where the normies can now see the patterns of what's going on and why things, more importantly, are going wrong. They aren't just quite there yet, however, ready to assign the blame to where it so heartily belongs, but it's very clearly a step in the right direction. This also makes a lot of sense from a creative perspective, as the right-wing invaders, far from burning, pillaging, and generally aggressing upon the native populace with misgenderings, one presumes, just watched the thing, dropped some fan art, and then went away, waiting for the next episode. And hey, don't get me wrong, the quote right-wing audience, or in this case just regular people it seems, can certainly get aggressive too. We've spent years berating and bashing companies back into line after a decade of ugly female characters and general anti-player, anti-fan behavior. But at least when we get angry, it's pretty obvious as to why. We usually say it quite outright, or otherwise simply just because we want the thing to be good. The Sonic movie redesign is the best example of all of this, taking the blue hedgehog from a nightmarish abomination to a true representation of the character, and transforming what would have been a massive flop into a multi-movie series. As crucially as well, when we get what we want, we usually also tend to reward the company for giving us what we want, instead of doubling down and looking for the next thing to be upset about. It's just too bad so few companies are actually willing to listen. But our eager opposition is quite different. Firstly, they objectively hate attractive characters. If the recent strings of examples mentioned already isn't enough to hammer this home, or the last 10 years for that matter, we even have a new character from Overwatch to demonstrate both points. Firstly, Xion is an objectively attractive character. She's goddamn gorgeous, which is rare enough for Activision Blizzard, another very progressive company, and so Xion is immediately embraced by the overwhelming majority of the players, as Activision Blizzard is obviously attempting to appeal to the majority and the normal people here, even as the progressives then quickly set about the usual process of denouncing her and fixing her, which, precisely like Kit, simply means making her less feminine and less attractive. The end question then quite simply becomes, for the companies, you could appeal to an audience that is as fickle as a muff connoisseur in a combined drug and lesbian sex parlor, that will study every design you put out to the point of obsession, with the express intent and purpose of finding something, anything, to complain about, primarily because of the pathological need to find ammunition to use against the creators. And the only way to please this group is to create something objectively repulsive to the majority of the customer base, or, and I understand this is a wild idea here, one apparently now shared by Activision Blizzard and very soon too, I think, Glitch, you could target the audience that watches your thing, that makes cool things about your thing, that doesn't harass anyone or leave accusations that you're a sexist or a racist on Glassdoor. And the best part of it all, the piece de resistance, the cream on top of the cake, that audience is also blatantly, glaringly obvious as the sun, the majority audience. I'm just saying, Glitch seems to be bumbling from drama to drama, mainly manufactured by the same group of mentally ill individuals they decided to target early on when they didn't know any better. Meanwhile, Space King is out there making rape, race, and genocide jokes every 13.12 seconds. And there's not a single solitary drama coming out of that community. It really makes you wonder. Perhaps people who partake in escapism centered around extreme and horrible things as a joke do so because they can see the humor in it, the absurdity, meaning that they are, internally, intrinsically good people, whilst those that work themselves up into a frothing rage over a dent in a clown's waist, maybe not so much. Consider, therefore, the following. Gatekeeping, good. But perhaps the left has a point. Perhaps gate crashing, also good. Until next time, I've been Arch. Thank you all very much for watching, and I do hope to see you all again soon. Until then, have a good day.